Hi there. So let's say that you have a single page application built in something like AngularJS, and you want that Angular app to be able to authenticate against your existing Rails API, and your Rails application is using Devise to handle authentication. So if you are going down that path, such as myself, what I found is that you'll need to implement some sort of token-based authentication, and there's a nice standard out there called the JSON Web Tokens, or JWTs, and these provide a pretty easy way for us to implement a standardized token-based authentication solution. And the nice thing about this is that there are libraries for nearly every language out there that matters to web developers. The one that we'll use for Ruby is called the JWT gem, and the JWT gem provides a nice API for encoding payloads, and payloads are basically just JSON objects that contain some sort of identification information for our user. The secret, typically in a Rails application, is you'll use the Rails apps shared secret, the secret key that you would also use for the CSRF protection. And then also you can set the hashing algorithm. By default it's SHA-256, but it's quite nice to simply bump this up to a bit more secure algorithms such as SHA-512. And then what I found to be a gotcha, at least at the time of this writing, is that the supported reserved claim names, specifically the expiration time claim, this works great. It works only if you pull from head, so we're going to be doing that in our gem file. And then finally, to allow this application to make requests to our against our API, we're going to have to enable cores on it, so we're going to set the rack cores gem to do so, and that's very easy to do so in Rails. You'll notice that the example code here shows setting up some config middleware in the application file, but we're actually going to do that the Rails 4 way by putting that into an initializer. So if I jump to the code, the first thing we'll want to set up is to add these things to our gem file. So I have a clean Rails 4.1.8 application, and I've added Devise. I've also added the JWT gem, but instead of simply using rubygems.org, we're specifying version 1.1 and then passing in the Git repository, because we want to take advantage of the expiration claim that isn't currently available in the JWT Gem 1.0, but will be as soon as they actually release 1.1 on Ruby Gems. And then finally, we're adding rack cores. So why don't we look into that first? With rack cores, what we'll do is I've created an initializer, and the initializer is more or less exactly that snippet that we just saw here. It's just bundled into an initializer, and that's all we need to do. This application will configure itself properly when you deploy it to Heroku, and the nice thing about this gem is it ensures that it places this middleware at the beginning of the chain inside of rack, so that the warden authentication from Devise doesn't return preemptively without the course configuration. So that's pretty straightforward. The more complicated part, of course, is actually setting up Devise to pass a token, but it's not really that hard. What you'll want to do is, first of all, you'll want to set up some routes, or just adjust the routes a bit. So Here you can see in this example application, I have a stubbed endpoint for fake API requests. I also have a fake homepage, but the key here is that we overwrite the Devise routes here. In this case, I have a users model, a Devise user model, and what I've done is I've generated the sessions controller for it. And so inside of our routes here, we have to make sure that we tell Devise to use the generated user sessions controller instead of using the default built-in sessions controller that's provided by the Devise engine. So taking a quick look at that controller, what it is, again, it's just a namespace sessions controller that inherits from the default Devise sessions controller. And we'll look at this file shortly. This is a modified file that's from another example of using the Ruby JWT library. But the first thing that we'll need to do to this controller before we can even handle taking requests is that we need to disable CSRF protection because we've gone through this trouble to set up cores so external sites could make requests, but it still won't work if the CSRF protection is in place. So we disable the authenticity token because we're going to be using JWTs. And then because by default this controller is going to handle HTML requests, we're also going to want to allow it to handle JSON because the majority of these requests that are going to be coming from external APIs are going to be in the JSON format. So what I've done is I've just preserved the default behavior from the Devise create method, and I've also posted a link directly to it in the sessions controller just for reference if you ever want to go back and take a look at it. And by default, after this yield statement, this respond with method down here would have been called, but instead of that, we're going to generate our auth token, which is the JWT, and we're going to use you pass in what's called basically a payload, and that's some sort of identifying information about the user. In this case, we're going to use the user's ID, and what we do here is pretty straightforward. Instead of simply calling this respond with command, we're going to customize the JSON response so that in addition to sending the username back, we'll also send back a token, and our application will then be able to take this token and store it in the session either via cookie or through local storage, so that subsequent requests to the API can then be sent using that token. So why don't we take a look at what this auth token module looks like. And in here, we require the JWT gem, and then we simply have a issue token and a valid method. So I found that in order to implement the expiration, those reserved claim words, so to handle the expiration claim word, we need to actually embed that into this hash that is our payload. So if you remember, if I jump back there, this is just a Ruby object that has a user ID key with the user's ID from the authenticated resource. And what I'm going to do is we're just going to add another key to that same payload called exp. And then what you do is you create a timestamp, and you need to convert that to an integer, so that's like a Unix timestamp. And after that, you simply encode the payload, and in this case, we're using the secret key that's global inside the Rails application to encode and decode these tokens. And the other thing that we'll do is check if a token is valid, and I should mention that the encode method is going to return an encoded string, and so here, we're just when we pass the token back, it's just going to be an encoded string as well that will decode, and by default, given this claim word, the expiration claim word, this will fail if the token has expired. So if you wanted to test this out, you could set this to 10 seconds from now, and you'll be able to log in immediately, maybe send 1 or 2 requests, and after those 10 seconds are up, you'll see in your application that you'll start getting 401 not authorized responses from the server. So this is how the auth token module looks. It's very simple. And back in the sessions controller, again, all we're doing is generating that encoded string and passing that back to our third-party client. So the next thing that we'll need to do is simply check for that where in methods that we want to protect to ensure that they only are accessible if the user is passing in a JWT that's valid. So to do that, here I've just added inside the application controller, we're requiring the auth token lib again, and just for reference, that's because I'm storing that in the lib directory here. It's not getting auto-loaded, auto-included, and so here, I've just created a protected method called verify JWT token, and we can use this as a before filter, and so we'll just return the head unauthorized if one of two things: if there is no authorization request header included in the request, then we obviously know that the user can't be authenticated in any way via token. And then additionally, we'll want to actually test that authorization. And normally, when you send an authorization back, it would an authorization header, it would look something like this with the bearer, and then it would be the encoded string for the token. So what we're doing here is kind of rudimentary, but we're just splitting that string by space and pulling the last item from that, which theoretically should be our token. And so here, this is a quick and dirty way of just testing to make sure that that encoded string is actually valid. If you wanted to do any additional protection there for security reasons, by all means do. This is just a very simple example. But now, if I go into this fake API controller that I've created as a stub here, you can see all we do is simply add this in as a before filter, and now any requests to this action on the API will be protected via the a JWT. So if a user doesn't have a JWT passed in via the authorization header, they're just going to get a 401 error here.